The war between India and China is getting worse, with emotions rising along the line of real power. At the center of the conflict are the places known as Runal Fardish and Oxygen Chin, which are very close to the border and are strongly contested by both India and China. It looks like the US is joining forces with India and Russia to try to find a solution to the problem for China. What started out as a regional problem has now become a global one that could involve all 6 superpowers. China's troops crossed into Indian-controlled land in September, which New Delhi now sees as a bold act of war. Tensions keep rising along the line of real control. Discarded tools, homemade buildings, and food packages are all signs that Chinese troops are living in the area illegally. The disagreement has gotten worse over Runal Fardish and Oxygen Chin, 2 places along the border that have been highly contested for a long time. Both India and China claim the land as their own. In December 2023, China started building a new heliport in the Arunachal sector, which is only 12.4 meters, 20 kilometers, from the Indian border. The heliports are being built in Yiyi Prefecture, which is in the southeast of the Tibet Independent Region. There have always been a lot of patrols in this area, especially at the fishtail 1 and 2 edges, which seems odd. People see China's actions as an example of it going beyond what it has agreed to do. This is because India and China have agreed not to build anything along their contested border. Kiran Rishi, India's union minister, spoke out about China's actions. He said that India was upset because the 2 countries had been talking and China's actions were against what they had agreed to. China pushed back and said that Aruna was its land, which India did by naming a mountain top after the 6th Dalai Lama. This made things worse. Lian, a spokeswoman for China's foreign ministry, said that India's acts were not valid and that the area around Zagan belonged to China. Colonel Ranir Singh Jamwal led the group that went to name the peak. They climbed the mountain for 15 days, going through dangerous cracks, a 3.0 kilometers long glacier in the Goran area, and steep ice walls. The mountain's highest point is 20,941 feet, 6,383 meters, above sea level. It is in the Goran region of the Arunachal Pradesh Himalayas, in the Tawang West Kamong region. When they finally got to the top, they called it Sanji Yang Gapso to honor the 6th Dalai Lama's timeless knowledge and important service to the Mampa community. In conclusion, the territory dispute between India and China is getting worse, with emotions rising along the line of real control. The US and Russia are willing to help China find a solution, and India will continue to protect and honor the Dalai Lama. China and India have been fighting over the Lak border for years, which has caused emotions to rise to the point of war. Diplomacy has been used to try to solve the problem, but both countries have run into problems in the last few years. Reports say that there is now an understanding to check along the line of control in eastern Tibet, but sources inside the country are not sure about this. Sjai Shankar, the Minister of External Affairs, said that even though the deal was good, people shouldn't jump to the conclusion that the war is over just yet. Both sides have sent a lot of soldiers to the area. For example, in answer to Chinese troop moves, Indian forces sent over 68,000 soldiers, 90 tanks, 330 infantry, combat vehicles, and other weaponry to forward areas. China has also built roads, highways, bridges, 4G networks, water, power, and other basic services in the border area. In the Tibet region, more than a dozen airports have been made better for both military and civilian use. These include Lhasa Gangar Airport, Lindsay Mainling Airport, Shati Peace Airport, Chambo Banga Airport, and Nagari Guna Airport. 3 more are being built close to the borders of Nepal and India. It is 1443 feet, 4,400 meters, above sea level, so the Chambo Banga Airport is not easily reached by tourists. It is being built close to the border with India and Nepal. In recent months, both countries have been passive-aggressive. Their biggest fight will happen in December 2022. Indian news sources say that Chinese troops were the ones who started the fight by entering Indian territory and trying to push back the border. At least 6 troops were hurt badly, and leaders from both sides had to step in to calm things down. Along the border, fights like this happen all the time without being recorded, and emotions are always high. A video from September 2021 that was found again in December 2022 shows that there are frequent fights and high emotions along the border that have not been recorded. People in India have always thought that New Delhi is not doing enough to protect its border with China, so a lot of people think that the video was put out there on purpose. The Indian people are more confident in their government after their win in Tibet, but this kind of pressure could lead India to go to war. Reports of attacks on Indian troops raise emotions, and India may have to move in Arunachal Pradesh, which is in a very interesting spot. China calls the area South Tibet because it claims Tibet as its own. Beijing recognizes the McMahon Line as the LAAC, but it claims 34,000 square miles, 990,000 square km, in Arunachal Pradesh as Tibetan land. Arunachal Pradesh and the Oxakan area in LLDAK were shown on a new map that China released in 2023 as being in China. India thought this move was an insult because it happened just a few days after Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping promised to calm down things on the Lok border. China said that India was wrong for building a tunnel in Arunachal Pradesh on March 9. The tunnel was meant to connect troops in the Tawang area all year and allow for trip movement at an elevation of 3,962 meters. India's defense along the line of real control with China will be stronger thanks to the Cell Tunnel. India's move was not well received by China's Ministry of National Defense, which said it made the border problem more complicated and went against efforts to keep peace and security. China has always thought that India does not accept its claim to Tibet, which is what the real problem is for them. Early in October, a group of about 30 Tibetans living in India started a protest outside the Chinese embassy. They were upset about the lack of human rights in Tibet. China had been under CCP rule for 75 years when this protest happened. It was a reminder to China that not everyone was happy with this accomplishment. About 85,000 Tibetan refugees are living in India right now. They are being helped by the Dalai Lama and his exile government in Dharamsala. China has always thought that India's work with the Dalai Lama was inappropriate, and they still do. China responded by filing an official report with New Delhi. However, India was able to figure out what China was up to. Then, China could say that the Dalai Lama's visit to Arunachal Pradesh was an invasion of its territory and a danger to ties between the two countries. In 1959, the Dalai Lama's trip to Arunachal Pradesh was a big deal in the area because it took place on Chinese soil. India was warned by a spokesman for China's foreign ministry that the move would cause problems at the border and hurt the growth of ties between the two countries. India cut off China right away, telling it not to get involved in its internal affairs since Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part of India. It was interesting to see how China reacted to the Dalai Lama's 7th trip to Arunachal Pradesh. China is likely gathering reasons to justify its possible attack of Indian territory, which is why people are so angry now. China has hired Tibetan refugees to join the Special Frontier Force, a secret unit that fights at high altitudes. This has made things even worse between the two countries. The force was made after the war between India and China in 1962 so that Tibetans who had fled India could join the guerrilla warfare. People who joined early on had mostly fought for the Chushi Gondruk, a guerrilla Tibetan force that fought China in the early 1960s. Ban Mullik, who was in charge of Indian intelligence, started the team. There are rumors that the US JA helped train about 12,000 Tibetans and paid for some of them. A member of the unit told the BBC that most of the training was done by Americans and that one of the guys taught 4 men who then trained everyone else. The guy spoke broken Hindi. Before a soldier named Nimit Tenson died in a landmine blast near Pangong Sa Lake in the Himalayan area of Lok, where Indian and Chinese troops had been fighting. No one knew about this group. India has been able to use the unrest in the area to its own advantage. Between 1271 and 1368, during the Qing dynasty, Tibet became a part of China. This is the start of a long past between China and Tibet. From 1644 to 1911, Tibet started to have more freedom. In 1911, the 13th Dalai Lama got rid of Chinese troops stationed in Lhasa, and in 1902, Tibet claimed independence. India was free, but neither China nor the West recognized it, and China still claimed Tibet. In 1950, China made Tibet an independent area that was run by the People's Liberation Army, which was led by Main Dong. The deal said that Tibet would have some freedom in the area, but it would still be controlled by China's foreign policy. The troops of Tibet would also become part of the PLA, and China would work to improve its own economy. China said it would protect Tibetan faith and customs, but it did the exact opposite and pushed down Tibetan culture as much as possible. When the Dalai Lama was in 1959, he got a strange request to see a play at the PLA offices near Lhasa. The PLA told the Dalai Lama's bodyguards on March 9 that they could not go to the show with him and that the Tibetan people should not know what was going on. They stood their ground, so on March 1, 1959, the PLA stopped the Dalai Lama from entering India as a punishment. India has had a business link with Tibet for a long time. Tibet sends India refugees, and India houses them and makes wool, silk, and handcuffs from the area. India sees the Dalai Lama as a useful ally in its fight against China, so it takes care of him so that he stays a problem for China. As the current Dalai Lama's health gets worse and he nears the end of his life, both China and India want to have a say in who takes over as leader. The first fight between India and Tibet, the Sea-Indian War, happened in 1962 and has been getting worse ever since. Talks about the border were tried in 1981, but the deal made in 1993 to keep the peace and quiet did not work. Because China is so aggressive, fights like the one in December 2022 could turn into full-on wars. The border issue in Tibet is just a small part of a much bigger problem. In 2020, there will be deadly fights between the two sides along the Galwan Valley. During the war, Indian troops crossed into Bhutan and stopped Chinese builders and engineers from finishing their work. Both sides pulled back, and China stopped building after the standoff was over. China, on the other hand, keeps building villages and towns inside Bhutan's traditional lines, and about 7,000 Chinese people now live there. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's reaction to the standoff on the Dolam Plateau in 2017 shows that India is ready to step in and stop China from expanding in the area for good. Even though India wants peace, making fun of China's desire to expand makes everyone angry. India is a big country in Asia that can fight back. If China keeps being mean to India along the border, India will not think twice about starting a full-scale war. India doesn't like what China did in September, and if China keeps being mean to India along the border, India won't think twice about starting a full-on war. The current problems between India and China aren't just affecting the border with Tibet. They're also affecting places like Bhutan and Bhutan. In conclusion, the problems between India and China are getting worse, and India's actions have made people worry that a full-scale war might happen.